In the final frames of the screenplay Shores of Sorrow, an exhausted blacksmith looks dead into the camera and makes a jarring claim. Memory is the most terrifying weapon. Look at this beautifully crafted Adiga shashka. In the violent era of the Caucasus War, you would expect an imperial army or a razor-sharp cavalry sword to be the ultimate weapon. An abstract concept like memory seems entirely out of place. To understand this claim, we must look at the script's blueprint. Instead of a linear story, it splinters into 4 timelines: trauma, revenge, consequences, and memory. Like a mosaic, we examine these historical fragments to see how they're pulled together to forge this weapon. Decoding this story means stepping back from the sword fights and horseback chases. We have to analyze the actual architecture of how a society processes immense cultural grief. The first track, labeled Trauma, takes us to the slave market in Kaffa. The script details a mother named Satani watching her young children being violently ripped from her arms, while gold coins hit a wooden table. The script dictates that the only clear sound in this scene is the heavy, rhythmic thud of that money changing hands. The screaming of the crowd is entirely muted. This specific audio choice frames the loss. Human lives and family lineages are being quantified into basic commerce, actively stripping these children of their history. When a culture experiences this degree of historical erasure, it leaves behind a massive psychological vacuum, and that kind of empty space always demands a violent response. That response fractures into 2 distinct paths. The first is charted in the timeline Revenge, following an outcast warrior or obrek named Zangur through the mountain passes. With everything stolen from him, Zangur decides the only way to fill the void is to pour the blood of his enemies into it. The second path is explored in the Consequences timeline, set in the marble halls of an Ottoman palace. Here we meet a military commander named Mustafa Pasha. Mustafa is actually Jambot, a man who has traded his Circassian identity for the wealth and political power of a foreign empire. He wears silk robes, but he still runs his fingers over an old tribal dagger. His character poses a difficult philosophical question for the audience. If you change your name and your clothes, can you successfully outrun your own bloodline? The script suggests that both of these coping mechanisms fail. Endless violence just yields more death, and total assimilation quietly finishes the job the slavers started. Which brings us back to the final timeline, memory. This is where we find Mashuko working in his soot-stained blacksmith shop. Pay close attention to the audio cues written into this scene. The script repeatedly calls for the heavy, low-frequency sound of a hammer striking an anvil. This chart breaks down the specific audio instructions. Notice how the rhythmic thud of Mashuko's hammer matches perfectly with the sound of the gold coins dropping in the market and the swords clashing in the mountains. This is a deliberate structural choice. Mashuko is taking the disjointed, painful fragments of his people's history and physically pounding them back together into a cohesive identity. In the logic of this script, time does not flow like a river that naturally heals all wounds. It acts as an anvil, requiring an agonizing, active process of creation. This explains why the climax of the screenplay ditches traditional pacing entirely and accelerates into a chaotic, cross-cutting montage of all 4 timelines at once. Psychological trauma rarely resolves in a straight line. It is messy and intrusive, forcing a person to navigate the horrors of the past and the reality of the present at the exact same time. When the script finally drops out of that chaotic montage, Mashuko is standing on the riverbank. The stage directions note that the dead, empty stare he carried throughout the film snaps into sharp focus. Fighting a foreign army head-on guarantees physical destruction, and hiding within their ranks guarantees cultural erasure. Mashuko realizes that memory is the ultimate weapon, because choosing to remember, even when it hurts, is the only way a culture can take a stolen past and hammer it into a future.